Nobody in that lavish wedding hall even noticed the quiet man standing near the back. They had no idea his mere presence would shatter their need for status entirely. He showed up in a faded suit and scuffed shoes, simply holding his little girl's trembling hand. The bride caught sight of him from across the room and smirked. Not warmly, not with any real genuine welcome. She brought him there on purpose, desperately trying to prove a point to everyone. Her goal was public humiliation in front of every wealthy VIP in her shallow circle. But 7 minutes later, 2 black SUVs rolled right up to the main entrance. Heavy security stepped out, and the final guest to walk through those doors was the exact tech CEO the bride's family had spent months begging to meet. The entire wedding completely froze. You and I both know how it feels to be written off by loud, insecure people who desperately need to feel superior. But this story proves that real success never actually has to shout. Adrian Cole was 29, carrying his painful reality the way truly secure men do, totally unbothered and never complaining. No loud dramatic displays, never begging anyone for cheap validation. He was tall and broad-shouldered, radiating that rare quiet confidence. The kind of physical presence that immediately shifted the energy of any room. Never loud, never aggressive, just deeply grounded. The kind of guy who observed much more than he ever spoke. And when he did speak, people actually stopped to listen. But his life had not always been this remarkably composed. 3 years prior, Adrian was a senior systems engineer at a massive hyper-growth tech firm on the East Coast. His name was constantly buried inside internal corporate documents, known as the brilliant architect behind completely flawless infrastructure systems. Systems that scaled effortlessly, things that dozens of other engineers actively tried to copy. At 26, he was naturally building software that 35-year-old veterans could barely even wrap their heads around. From the outside, his career trajectory looked absolutely unstoppable, like a direct path toward incredible success. Then his wife passed away. A slick highway, a drifting truck, 3 seconds of brutal impact. Just like that, everything he loved was instantly wiped out. He walked away with a quiet hospital room, a haunting death certificate, and little Sophie. She was only 3, way too young to understand why mommy was never walking through the front door again. For those first 6 months, he merely survived. The next 6 went toward keeping Sophie safe, fed, and comfortable. He ignored calls from his corporate bosses and let his lucrative engineering contracts expire. He relocated to a tiny apartment, not because he was broke or had to, but because stepping back from the noise felt like the truest response to a world that had totally shattered. He took on humble building maintenance and random freelance tech repairs. The pay was terrible and nobody clapped, but it kept him grounded for his daughter. And in those silent, unseen hours after little Sophie finally drifted off, Adrian was quietly building something new. A massive life upgrade that absolutely nobody in his past saw coming. Sophie was 6 now, small for her age but with deep, observant eyes that understood so much more than average adults ever realized. She was the exact type of kid who stayed perfectly calm in chaotic rooms, speaking in thoughtful, gentle sentences. She never went anywhere without her worn-out stuffed rabbit, Biscuit. You and I know what a true anchor means. That rabbit was her mother's gift, never leaving her hands. My daughter was shy, but not from weakness. It came from a quiet depth. Like she took time to process everything, much more deeply than the world expected of a kid. She adored me in this wonderfully quiet way. The absolute way a kid looks at a dad who just shows up for them. The wedding we were unexpectedly invited to, it belonged to Madison Clark. Madison was 27, beautiful and razor-sharp. She noticed absolutely everything, always quietly filing it away for future leverage. She came from a family where keeping up appearances was literal currency, where attending the right school and the right connections and the right last name opened heavy doors that wealth alone simply could not. She figured out early on that true power isn't just inherited. It was a continuous public performance. How you dressed, how you spoke, how you looked at people. It was about who you chose to include, and even more importantly, who you actively chose to exclude. She was marrying Logan Pierce, a 30-year-old entrepreneur. His family's massive property development firm was inactive. Negotiations with one of the region's absolute biggest corporate players. The ceremony was at an exclusive coastal resort that charged more per night than what regular people bring home all month. Every single guest was carefully curated for maximum status. Absolutely nothing was left to chance. But one name on that pristine guest list really did not belong to her polished world of strategic corporate alliances. My name was put on there for a very different reason. Let's step back a bit. Madison and I met during our university computer science days. We competed for the same tech internships and got paired for our senior capstone project. On paper, we looked like equals. In reality, we operated from entirely different worlds. Madison came from old money and deep connections. She wore the right designer brands, attended exclusive networking events, and smiled at the right people. She never needed to be the smartest software developer in the room. She only cared about being the most useful. When our capstone project actually opened a path to a massive corporate contract, she saw it as the perfect leverage, exactly the kind she always knew how to play. The assignment required us developing a prototype logistics optimization software for a local mid-sized shipping fleet. It was highly complex, demanding work, and honestly, I was the one doing most of it. I spent countless late nights in the engineering lab, quietly refining algorithms, stress testing the architecture. I was building something I felt genuinely proud of. Then a developer from a rival team approached Madison privately. They offered her a sweet cut of a deal just to access my underlying system framework. She seriously weighed the offer for about 2 days before she finally made her move. Not directly, she smoothly framed it as a collaboration, as a huge opportunity. She claimed I was being unnecessarily rigid about sharing knowledge. She hid behind the slick language of pragmatism and career advancement. I listened to her whole pitch, then I just said no, calmly, clearly, without any drama. I told her what she was proposing was academic misconduct, and frankly borderline industrial theft. Then I reported it straight to the department head. Madison faced a disciplinary review board. As you might guess, she kept her degree, but that shiny internship completely vanished. The final college project went to Adrian alone, simply because his hard work spoke for itself. Madison graduated just fine, but that sharp humiliation stuck with her, a petty, invisible splinter she spent years trying to dig out of her pride. She never let it go. Meanwhile, Adrian built a quiet, meaningful life, a solid career, real love, and a daughter. Then a sudden highway crash stripped it all away. No warning, no profound reason, just heartbreaking loss. To a shallow observer like Madison, it looked like total ruin. Like twisted proof that life rewarded winners like her, not struggling fathers like him. So when she started planning her lavish wedding, her thoughts turned to Adrian. She tracked him down. She found him doing simple maintenance work in a local business directory. She stared at her phone, savoring a long, deeply smug smile. She mailed the invite herself, using the sickly sweet, formal words of someone pretending to be above it all. She signed it with fake warmth. She even penned a note at the bottom. "It would mean a great deal to have you there. Pure performance." Adrian read the expensive paper twice, then dropped it on the kitchen counter. He ignored it for 3 days. He understood the petty game she was playing. He saw right through the trap, but then his little girl, Sophie, found the envelope. She could barely read, but she spotted the word wedding stamped in fancy gold foil. And she asked her dad if they were going out somewhere special. He told her maybe. She looked up at him with those wide, careful eyes. You know how 6-year-olds ask questions that pierce right through your soul? "Dad, are you a bad person?" He just blinked at her. She explained that kids at school said if you ignored an invitation, you were being a really mean person. She didn't want her dad to be mean, she just needed to be absolutely sure. Adrian stared at his daughter for a long, quiet moment. Then he promised they would go, not to prove Madison wrong. Not to confront her, seek revenge, or make some dramatic statement. He would go simply because his little girl asked him not to hide. Because true success means living so authentically that you never run from a petty trap just to save face. So he ironed his old suit. He polished his worn work shoes until they gleamed. He helped Sophie into the very nicest dress she owned. A soft blue cotton dress, little white flowers along the hem. She tucked her stuffed dog under her arm and they drove toward the coast. The luxury resort was exactly what Adrian expected, totally overwhelming. Calculated and designed to scream one clear message: wealth. Massive white tents billowed across a manicured lawn, right on the edge of the ocean bluffs. Expensive string lights wrapped through sculpted hedges. Ballet darted between gleaming luxury cars. Uniformed staff glided around with champagne, highly paid to make all this luxury look perfectly natural and completely effortless. Every single detail was a loud, desperate flex, reminding everyone that the bride lived in a completely different universe than a single dad with a dented car bumper. Adrian parked in the very back. Sophie climbed out and immediately grabbed his rough hand. She silently pressed against his side. That right there is real success. I squeezed my daughter's hand once and we walked in. The second we stepped inside the main hall, the room's temperature dropped in a small, invisible way, exactly what happens when an unwanted guest crashes a carefully curated space. You know that look. People glancing my way, then snapping away, trying desperately not to stare while absolutely staring. The wedding venue was huge, sure, but whispers always managed to carry. Is that the repairman? Who's the guy with the little kid? I don't know him. Does anybody know who he is? I steered my daughter to some empty chairs in the back, right by a window facing the garden. She sat down so carefully, clutching her stuffed animal, scanning the crowd with big, watchful eyes. A passing waiter just stared, sizing us up with the obvious judgment of somebody deciding if we were actual guests or just lost workers who stumbled through the wrong door. I just sat up straight, folded my hands, and waited. Then, my ex-wife appeared at the far end of the hall, gliding past people with the absolute confidence of someone who built this whole world, just checking to make sure everyone was impressed. She looked beautiful, honestly. The ivory wedding dress fit perfectly. She even had real fresh flowers pinned right into her hair, broadcasting to the entire room that she had finally won. Her eyes locked onto me within 30 seconds of walking in. She didn't react right away. She just kept chatting, tilted her head, and laughed at her bridesmaid's joke. But her eyes kept flicking back to me, once, twice, and by the third time she let herself really stare. A tiny smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. Smug, completely satisfied. She leaned into the bridesmaid standing next to her, whispering something. Her friend glanced my way, biting her lip to hide a laugh. Then they both turned back around, like the joke was already over. My daughter felt it, 6 years old but incredibly sharp. She squeezed my hand a little harder and looked up at my face. "Dad," she whispered to me, "they don't really like us, right?" I looked down at my daughter, feeling completely at peace. "We don't need to prove anything to them," I smiled. She chewed on that thought like a scientist studying a heavy, complex problem. She wasn't entirely sold on it. But she leaned back in her chair, hugged her toy tighter, and stayed quiet. You and I both know what comes next. During cocktail hour, she made her move. She crossed the crowded room toward me, champagne glass ready, acting like she was doing some grand, generous favor by visiting me. I stood up when she got close. Good manners are ingrained, even when unearned. I just smiled and told her it was a beautiful venue. She held my eye contact for just a second too long. "I really didn't think you'd have the nerve to show up," she whispered under the music, keeping that fake smile plastered on. "But here you are, still wearing that same old suit." I didn't need to defend myself. I wished her well and walked away entirely unbothered. But listen, the dinner reception is where she played her actual hand. They arranged the tables in a giant horseshoe around the raised platform where the bridal party sat. You know that heavy energy in a room where every single person is putting on a show? Fake compliments traded like cash, important names dropped just right. Spotless reputations kept alive by the exhausting work of looking totally effortless. A room packed with guests working incredibly hard to prove they never had to work hard at all. I sat near the edge of that horseshoe setup, not completely left out, I suppose, but placed exactly where they could watch me, safely out of reach from the VIP crowd. My daughter Sophie sat beside me, quietly nibbling on a warm dinner roll, watching the string band tune up in the corner. Up on that raised stage, Madison scanned her guests. She had planned this exact moment and was just waiting for the room to hit the perfect temperature. She slowly stood up. A waiter handed her a mic. She started out sweet. She thanked both families, praising the friends who flew in from out of state, dropping names with pure warmth, giving everyone their little pat on the back. then a heavy pause. "There are also some people here," she announced. Her tone shifted just a fraction, not cruel yet. "Guests I invited because I believe we should fully acknowledge the entire story of our past. Some people face massive life setbacks that are entirely their own fault. And maybe seeing where the rest of us ended up will finally help them understand." She stared across the room. She never actually said my name. She didn't have to. Her eyes locked right onto me like a sniper scope. Every single head at the nearby tables traced her gaze just like sunflowers turning toward the sun. 140 pairs of eyes locked right onto me. A few let out nervous laughs. They didn't really get the punchline, but no one wants to be left out of the joke. Most went dead silent. You know that heavy quiet when something uncomfortable goes down and nobody plans on stepping in. The groom beside her shifted a bit in his seat. I saw something flicker in his face, not quite disgust but close enough. He lifted his crystal champagne glass but never took a single sip. Sophie froze entirely. I felt her tiny fingers grab tight onto my arm. Not pulling me, not asking for help, just needing contact. She hugged her stuffed toy against her chest. When I glanced down, her eyes were shining. That glassy shine right before a kid breaks down, trying so hard not to cry in front of total strangers. I leaned down close. I smoothed out the collar of her perfectly fine little dress, tucked a loose strand of hair safely behind her ear, whispered a quiet joke just for her. She blinked once, took a deep breath, and held it together. I sat up straight. I never looked at Madison, never scanned the crowd. I just grabbed my water glass and took a slow sip, the total calm of a man who realized, years ago, that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone in that room. Because simply living well proves everything. Watch closely. His pure silence unsettled the room worse than any scream could. The bride expected a scene. Humiliation, outright anger. A bright red face, a lowered chin. Any visible flinch she could point at to feel superior. Instead, the single dad sat like stone, completely untouched by drama he didn't create. His pure refusal to play along chilled the room in ways she never expected. One woman at the next table nervously looked away, then another did. A guy nearby suddenly found the wedding band deeply fascinating. The cruel laughter Madison wanted just died right in their throats. Madison marched right back to her chair. The reception got loud again, but the damage was done. A quiet shift, impossible to just ignore. Beside him, little Sophie quickly wiped her eyes with her hand. She hugged her toy tight and resumed eating her bread, small bite by bite. The little girl stayed quiet, and Adrian just absorbed that heavy feeling. That crushing pain of watching your child take a hit meant for you. But he knew his best defense was just sitting still, refusing to feed the exact drama they desperately wanted. "Stick with me here." A waiter actually noticed it first. Two massive black SUVs rolled up to the resort entrance, moving with that heavy, calm confidence of cars that never rush, because the whole world just stops for them. The venue manager rushed outside. Inside, the party kept going, the band played on. Guests slowly wandered out to the dance floor. The crowd grew loud again, buzzing with that typical late-night champagne energy. Then the door swung wide. Two huge guys walked in. Wide shoulders, sharp suits, and clear earpieces catching the room light. They walked with this intense, controlled focus that made everyone else look completely sloppy. Scanning the crowd, they took their posts with the dead calm of guys who need zero introduction. Because their exact job was already crystal clear to everyone. All the party chatter dropped by half in exactly 4 seconds. The music faded out, expensive drinks were slowly lowered. People just stopped talking mid-sentence. The bride's family stood up instantly, staring at the doors with that hungry, greedy look of people trying to figure out if this meant money or danger. The groom's rich friends traded looks, whispers started bouncing between the fancy tables. Someone major, a groomsman, muttered out loud, "Who actually invited them?" Someone else asked. Nobody had a clue. Then Eleanor Whitmore stepped inside. Only 28, she wore her pure power like an absolute force of nature. Never putting on a fake show, but just living so high up that she forgot how heavy her presence really was. She had that quiet luxury of a billionaire who never needs to prove her worth. Sharp dark coat, hair tied back, wearing nothing shiny except a simple watch. She moved forward completely unbothered by who was staring. I watched the whole room suddenly feel exposed. Anyone in there tracking financial news knew exactly who she was. Eleanor Whitmore, founder and CEO of Whitmore Systems. Her tech firm had completely rewired logistics infrastructure across 3 continents. The exact enterprise Logan's family had been desperately trying to partner with for 8 solid months. That one deal. A contract that could blast his family's wealth into a totally different stratosphere. The single guest Madison's family had quietly, strategically prayed would show up today as a powerhouse contact. Well, she was here now. The entire place froze. I watched her scan the crowd with that ruthless efficiency of hers, quickly judging the room and finding it completely uninteresting. She didn't offer a single smile to anyone. She totally ignored their open stares. She carried herself like someone who only showed up on her own terms, with absolute zero patience for anything wasting her time. Then her eyes locked onto mine, her pace shifted. A slight change of direction. Her 2 security guards mirrored the pivot without a word. She strode straight across the hall, ignoring the gaping guests and blowing right past the head table. Past a stunned Madison, stopping dead right in front of me. The whole venue went dead silent, just holding its breath. I felt Sophie's tiny hand grip my arm tight. My daughter just stared up at this imposing woman with wide, unblinking eyes. Eleanor held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds before speaking. Her face wasn't exactly warm. Warmth just isn't her style, but the look she gave me carried a quiet respect, a nod to the deep history we shared. "You're 7 minutes late," she said. She sounded exactly like someone who spent her whole life being dragged down by other people's incompetence. But more than that, it was undeniably the voice of a woman speaking to someone she trusted. The quiet stretched out. I looked back at her, and for the first time tonight, my guard finally dropped a little. No big emotional display, just the quiet relief of a guy finally breathing air that actually makes sense to him. I murmured my reply, keeping my voice way too low for anyone else to hear. A tiny, almost invisible smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Up on her little platform, Madison sat completely frozen. Her champagne glass tilted dangerously in her hand, totally forgotten. Beside her, Logan's face had morphed into a mask of pure, absolute shock. That smug, newlywed glow was totally erased, replaced by sudden, sharp panic. His dad, sitting just 3 tables away, slowly scrambled to his feet. The truth spilled out in fragments over the next few minutes. Half from what Eleanor bluntly declared, and the rest the stunned crowd simply pieced together. 3 years ago, right before the accident. Before the cramped apartment, the maintenance work, and my invisible rebuild. I was the lead systems architect on a massive tech project nobody in that room knew to connect to me. I spent 14 grueling months coding out the foundational layer, the core digital framework for Whitmore Systems' most critical platform. I built it under a private consulting deal that we kept completely off the radar. I had simply delivered the work. Then my marriage shattered, and I quietly stepped back to be a single father. You and I both know how true success works. My code quietly became the backbone for a giant firm processing logistics data for over 230 clients. Eleanor Whitmore, however, had never forgotten. "Most of the people in this room," she said, addressing the crowd, though her sharp gaze moved with absolute precision right to my ex-wife, Madison, "would have trouble naming the person who made the company I run possible. I never have any trouble naming him." She never raised her voice. She wasn't putting on a show. She stated it like a concrete fact, no embellishment and no proof required. Without Adrian's work, Whitmore Systems would not have survived past year 2. Every single contract I've signed, every system running under my company's name, it runs on architecture he built. She let that truth settle for a moment. "So, when someone tells me this man is a failure," she continued, and her steady gaze held Madison's without blinking, "I find it very instructive about the person saying it." Beside me, my daughter Sophie had completely stopped breathing. She looked at the CEO, then up at me and back to Eleanor again. The groom's father had not sat back down. Those guests who laughed during Madison's petty toast earlier were now studying the floor, the tables, or anywhere that wasn't the dead center of the room. My ex-wife just opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Eleanor didn't rush anything. She had the patience of a woman who built her massive success through quiet precision rather than loud speed. She let the heavy silence do its necessary work before she finally spoke again. The reception hall had the heavy stillness of a collective social reckoning. The kind that hits when people realize all at once that the toxic drama they were participating in was not what it appeared to be. She turned fully toward Madison, not acting aggressively. Not with visible anger, but with the cool, exacting attention she would bring to a fierce dispute over contract terms. "I was invited to this event," Eleanor stated. "I came as a professional courtesy. What I found when I walked through those doors was a man I deeply respect, seated at the edge of a room designed to diminish him, after being publicly referenced in a toast intended to do exactly that." She looked at Madison steadily. "That is not something I overlook." Madison had spent her whole adult life reading rooms. She could spot power dynamics from clear across a hall, anticipate strict social consequences before they arrived, calibrate every single word for maximum effect. But nothing prepared her for the fact that my quiet life was a mirror, turning her own carefully constructed humiliation inside out and aiming it back. "I don't think you understand the full context," she began. "I perfectly understand the context," Eleanor replied flatly. "You and I know this silence, the kind that makes everyone suddenly study their hands or their shoes. Anything to avoid making eye contact with the two powerful women at the center of it." Logan's father finally moved toward our table with the practiced warmth of a man who built a vast business empire mostly on his slick ability to smooth over difficult situations. He extended a hand toward Eleanor, quickly rambling about what a wonderful and beautiful wedding day it had been, about how much both families truly valued this rare opportunity. She babbled about how any misunderstanding could surely be fixed. Eleanor didn't even glance up. "The partnership discussions are over," she stated. That outstretched hand just hung in dead air, before quietly pulling back in pure defeat. Logan watched it all. You and I have probably seen that look, a man watching his supposedly solid future splinter into 1,000 unfixable cracks. He slowly stood up. He just stared at Madison. There was no dramatic rage on his face, none at all. It was much quieter than that, honestly far more final. It was the cold realization of a guy completely rethinking the wedding he had just committed to. Madison could literally feel the entire room pulling away from her. The fake alliances, the impressions, the carefully crafted image of a woman who deserved perfection. Everything was shattering so fast, there was absolutely no way left to stop the bleeding. Suddenly, her bridesmaids were fascinated by the empty table settings. Her father started muttering in a low, rapid voice to her mother, a harsh whisper that sounded entirely like shifting the blame. Her mom was firing back with small, frantic gestures that screamed something far beyond mere panic. She had micromanaged this entire wedding reception, every single chair, every tiny place card, every word of her toast. She had specifically invited Adrian Cole to stand at the edge of her flawless new world, just so he could witness her triumph and realize everything he could never be. She had pictured that petty satisfaction in her head like a perfectly directed movie scene. She obsessed over that exact moment during all those stressful months. It fueled her through the brutal logistics, the dress fittings, and all the endless vendor arguments. But we know that showing off rarely goes as planned. Right in the middle of that train wreck, little Sophie tugged on Adrian's sleeve. He gently looked down at her. She'd been sitting completely still through the whole mess, showing the calm focus of a kid who senses something major is happening and chooses to simply watch and learn instead of throwing a loud tantrum. She clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit tightly to her chest. Her little eyes were totally dry now, holding just that faint glassy shine of tears that almost fell earlier. "Dad," she whispered so softly, "you're not a failure, right?" That heavy word echoed through the space like a glass dropped on concrete. Quiet, yet absolutely shattering in the dead silence it instantly created around them both. Adrian slowly crouched down until he was right at her eye level. He didn't even bother scanning the crowded room. He didn't care if anyone was staring, even though half the room was watching. He just looked at his little girl the way he always did, with the pure, complete, undivided focus of a father who knew she was the only real success that mattered. He whispered, "No, sweetheart, I never was." Sophie held his eyes for a second, carrying the serious weight of someone finally putting an old, lingering doubt to rest. Then she gave a firm nod, like a massive, life-altering truth had just been settled permanently. She immediately leaned forward and threw her arms right around his neck, showing the fearless trust of a kid who knows exactly where true safety lives. He held her close, resting his large hand on her tiny head, closing his eyes tightly. The room's noise faded. Real success, you see, never needs an audience. The music fading behind us. You could hear 140 people rethinking everything they knew. The clinking of champagne glasses just completely faded away. There was only the warmth of my daughter's arms around my neck, the familiar scent of her hair, and this deep knowledge. A truth I never questioned when things got hard, that I had actually made the right choices. Eleanor watched us from nearby. Her expression shifted, not exactly into warmth, of course, because being warm was never something she did very naturally, but into the sharp focus of someone seeing something that is just undeniably true. Across the room, a female guest had quietly pressed the back of her hand up against her mouth, staring off blankly into the middle of nowhere. Logan still stood up at the altar, watching his bride. Not with accusation, not with any visible anger. He looked like a man silently reevaluating his whole life, realizing the story he was told just did not add up anymore. And my ex-wife Madison sat alone at the head table. The flowers were fresh, champagne freezing cold, her dress immaculate. Every technical detail of the wedding reception still perfectly arranged, holding the unspoken truth that fake perfection shatters the exact second something actually real walks into the room. I finally stood up, straightened my suit jacket. That old worn suit served its purpose tonight with way more dignity than it ever had any right to. I reached down gently and took Sophie's hand. She tucked Biscuit under her other arm and looked up at me with a soft expression that was, for the first time all night, totally uncomplicated. I turned back to Eleanor. We shared a very brief, quiet exchange, the functional kind two people have when they know each other well enough to say a lot using only a handful of words. She told me the newly revised contract terms would hit my desk by the following Tuesday. I told her I appreciated her coming. She muttered something that, from a distance, might have actually passed for a genuine, hard-earned compliment. I almost smiled. Then I simply left. No dramatic announcement, no backward glance, no smug satisfaction. You know, that struck them the hardest. Because everyone in that fancy ballroom had just witnessed something huge, and the single father at the center of the drama was walking away without needing to claim any victory. I strolled through the silent reception tables with my daughter, completely unhurried. And just like that, we were through the doors and outside. The cool coastal air hit us. The ocean sounded beautiful, and the bright lights of the luxury resort spilled across the parking lot in these long, warm golden rectangles. Inside, the wedding continued in a purely technical sense. The band resumed playing. Waiters kept pouring drinks, but the entire event was permanently shifted by what we had brought into it. And between you and me, everyone there knew the rest of their night would feel completely different than the fairy tale they originally planned. Logan's father just sat frozen at his table, nervously turning a silver pen over in his hands. Logan eventually walked back to sit right next to Madison. He stayed quiet, but not in a way that meant he was out of words. He was silent the way a person gets right when a hard truth has been uncovered that needs time before it turns into real words. I watched Logan look at his new wife, really seeing her, and she stared back in total silence. Nearby, her parents were already arguing in rapid, hushed whispers. Her father stood there with his hand covering his face. Their perfect evening, so carefully built and so flawlessly planned, had completely fallen apart in 40 minutes with the swift efficiency of a machine that had just been waiting to finally break. Walking to the parking lot, my daughter looked up. "There sure are a lot of stars," she whispered. I looked up too. The coastal darkness let every single star shine so incredibly clearly. I smiled and agreed that there really were. She asked if we could stop for ice cream on the way home. I told her we absolutely could. She swung my hand back and forth, the exact way children swing hands when they feel completely safe, assessing their world and finding it wonderfully manageable. I just let her swing it. We got into the car and drove home through the dark with the windows down. Because that cool evening coastal breeze is exactly the kind of air you want to feel. You see, true success is quiet. In the months that followed, the life I was building took shape. That incredible consulting arrangement with Eleanor Whitmore. My systems grew in ways even Eleanor had not initially expected. The deep foundational work I had done 3 whole years ago. The digital architecture I built between my little girl's bedtime and my very own. In the blue glow of my tiny apartment while the city slept, was really just the quiet beginning. Eleanor Whitmore was never a person who misplaced her trust, and she certainly didn't misplace mine. My name started appearing on major tech projects of a scope that would have shocked everyone who looked down on me in that resort hall. I didn't move into a grander or fancier apartment. I didn't buy a flashy car or expensive suits. I skipped the loud signals people use to prove they finally made real money. Instead, I sent Sophie to a school with a garden and a reading program she loved. And I was there to pick her up at the end of every day. Because I was still in all the quiet ways that had ever truly mattered. The exact same man standing at the back of that wedding hall, with old shoes polished just to catch the evening light. Her stuffed bunny biscuit, for the record, was still fully operational. Even though one torn ear had required a little careful repair. That Sophie performed herself. I made sure to tell her it was the finest surgical work I had ever seen. She proudly informed me she had also stitched up a tiny tear in the rabbit's paw, which I had completely missed, so she figured that made us perfectly even. As for the wealthy Pierce family, losing that Whitmore partnership was a massive financial setback that took them many brutal months to fully absorb. They made desperate, preliminary approaches to other potential corporate partners. But Eleanor had spoken her mind in front of witnesses, and in that elite industry people listened very closely. The heavy, crushing weight of that evening followed Logan's father into tense boardrooms and desperate phone calls for a very long time. As you might guess, Logan himself spent the months after his chaotic wedding in the isolated quiet of a man, completely renegotiating his fragile understanding of a great many things. He and my ex-wife Madison separated long before the year was even out. Not with the dramatic cruelty bad marriages usually generate, but with the slow, inevitable, deliberate. He left with the weary certainty of a man who measured out a life together and realized the math simply failed. He was never cruel about it. He was just honest, and honestly, that was the one thing Madison was completely unprepared to handle. Madison's reality shrank in that specific way that lives built purely on performance always collapse. When the act fails, it doesn't happen all at once. Not with one massive explosion, but through a slow, steady, very unglamorous fading of the high society network she spent years building. Those vital connections suddenly stopped calling back. Doors she thought were wide open turned out to be locked tight against her. She wasn't ruined in some grand dramatic tragedy. She still had the money and skills to rebuild something. But that specific shiny version of herself she so carefully crafted, the one that relied on putting others down to prove her own worth, that mask was publicly and completely ripped away. You and I know she never got the satisfaction of seeing exactly when Adrian finally moved on. He never made a speech, he never even addressed it. He simply did, exactly like people who have learned to carry. Real weight eventually dropped the toxic baggage that was never worth holding. The only image that truly mattered now was this, a single father and his little girl, strolling down a peaceful coastal trail on a crisp autumn afternoon. Warm, heavy golden light reflecting beautifully across the open water. Her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked securely under her little arm. Both of them chatting away in that wonderfully easy, unbroken rhythm of two people who are each other's entire world, where comfortable silence and happy chatter blend into one perfectly simple thing. She pointed down at something in the waves. He looked over, then whispered something that sparked a joyful, totally unguarded, whole-body laugh of a kid who thinks her dad is genuinely, absolutely hilarious in a way that never fades. He didn't need an audience or applause to know his own worth. He truly never needed it. Because real success was standing right beside him. A little girl holding a blue-stitched rabbit, laughing her heart out at a passing pelican. For him quietly and completely. Living beautifully without any audience at all was already enough.